Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo. With your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo sports talk and more. Today's episode is presented by Golf Dojo, your space, your time, your game. Bring your game to Golf Dojo, Western New York's best indoor golf experience. Visit mygolfdojo.com for more information. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much, as always, for watching, for listening, for following, for subscribing. I do appreciate y'all very, very much. Talked about it a little bit on yesterday's show. The NFL Buffalo Bills offseason is finally over. We actually have a training camp practice in the books. And to talk about that and plenty more, I got my good friend from the Buffalo Sports Collective, PK, joining me today. What's going on, buddy? How you doing?
Not bad, not bad. My co-host, Phil, is officially getting married next Saturday. So finally got all the outfits picked out. They're kind of going like a more like a derby theme. So lighter colored jackets and shirts. They're allowing us to wear like cool hats and stuff like that. I finally got that in, but a bunch of us are driving up next Friday. We got a big Airbnb, which is like half a mile down the road. So no transportation needed. You might be seeing a few of us wandering in the road trying to get back to the Airbnb, but we're very pumped for him for next Saturday.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations to Phil, the other half of Buffalo Sports Collective. I say it all the time. A really strong podcast, especially if you are a Buffalo Bandits fan. You're not going to see anything even close to it anywhere else. So if you're a Buffalo sports fan, check them out. But if you're a Buffalo Bandits fan, you really need to check out Buffalo Sports Collective if you haven't already. Where's the wedding? Like, how far you got to travel to?
It's one of the Finger Lakes, maybe Seneca Lake, something like that. Nice, I don't know. We're driving up Friday after my brother gets out of work. So we'll be up there 5 o'clock until Sunday morning.
So cool, man. Well, again, big congratulations to him. Congratulations to Buffalo Bills fans. You have made it. The offseason finally is over. Let me ask you this before we dive in. And the Buffalo Bills, like I said, they had a camp practice today. Got a handful of observations that have been discussed and written about that I want to kind of go over with you today as well. Actually, a pretty significant piece of Buffalo Sabres news that we'll hit on during this episode as well. But now that the offseason is over, is it me or did it feel like this was an exceptionally long offseason? And maybe if I were to say that to you every July, you might feel the same way by the time it gets to be mid-July. But I don't know, man. PK, for me, this just felt like an incredibly long offseason. Like it felt like an eternity ago when the Kansas City Chiefs were ending the Buffalo season in divisional round in Orchard Park. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't finish any earlier than prior years, but I 100% agree with you. It felt longer. I think it was because all the old wave, which we've mentioned so many times, the old wave is gone. Then you had the signings. Then you had the draft and Stefan Diggs saga. It was so many things that were jam-packed into an offseason where it was just like, okay, when do pads come on? When do they start hitting the field again? It took forever to get to this point. But like you said, right off the start, we finally got there.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, like every level, every layer of the offseason had some pretty significant news. And I'd say probably a lot of it on paper from a national perspective, which I do not buy. Of course, I don't buy that, but seems to paint the Bills in a little bit of I don't want to say necessarily negative light, but maybe this team's taking a step back kind of light. Like we've already talked about ad nauseum at this point, all the veteran release guy, the guys that got released. Then they signed a couple guys, and then you kind of think the dust is settling for that. And maybe it's the fact that Stefan Diggs got traded in early April, as opposed to say February, mid-March or so. So kind of the dust was settled on that. Then the draft, that whole process, trading down twice. Maybe that you're expecting maybe a little some on June 1st, post June 1st, and nothing really materialized from that. But whatever, it's over. It's done with. We got stuff to actually talk about now, as opposed to just pure speculation, but I'll say this too. Training camp, when it starts, especially when it starts, like early on in camp, this is where like every little tiny thing that you could possibly imagine that goes on in camp, whether it's legit, whether it's stupid, and ultimately is meaningless, is going to get reported. It's going to get tweeted. It's going to get videoed. It's going to get photographed and put out there. So this is kind of like TMZ season in a way with Cam. You know what I'm saying? Almost like when a star goes to an airport and every little tiny photograph that you could possibly get out of that person is there. We've reached that point of the calendar year.
Yeah, you got CeeDee Lamb, who's not reporting. You got Tua, who's going to meetings. Jordan Love, who's only going to meetings. You got 2 San Francisco 49ers who are not practicing. It's that time. And then on top of that, you get the oh, man, did you see that catch from Patrick, or the catch from Worthy from Patrick Mahomes? You know, Bills are going to regret this. And then the next day, you might have a bad day at camp. Any type of good highlight is going to go absolutely bananas, and people are going to talk up those players. And if you have a bad day at camp, it's going to have the same effect. This guy's a bust. Why is he practicing with the second team? So on and so forth. So it's hard to look through the weeds on what's good and what's just being blown out of proportion.
You know, and you brought up an excellent point too. If you're looking right off the bat, you're a Buffalo Bills guy or girl, and you're looking for something positive right off the bat. How about this? Before we get into any stuff that happened on the field in day one, guess what? There's no holdouts going on right now. There's no contract squabbles. There's nobody reporting, but only doing a limited amount of work because of their contract. There's nobody who is coming off a major injury that is, physically unable to perform. Unlike, say, like the Miami Dolphins, who got, a couple big stars right now that are not even close to returning. So this is a relatively healthy team. Again, a team that really doesn't have any major contract issues. So that alone right now off the bat is something positive. There's no distractions going into training camp for the Buffalo Bills, and that's certainly a good thing.
Yeah, I think the biggest distraction is who's going to make the play calls on defense. I think that's pretty much the biggest distraction they got, and that's not that big of a deal because either way, I think it's a good candidate that would be the one making those calls to the linebacker core. I think if that's your biggest hurdle to get over by like drama's sake, you're in pretty good shape.
For sure. And look, I think Sean McDermott is a little bit of a control freak, but I don't think he's a control freak to the extent that if Bobby Babich is ready to call plays and Sean knows that he's ready to call plays, I don't think Sean McDermott is going to prevent him from calling defenses purely out of ego or anything like that, out of selfishness, stuff like that. I think a real challenge when it comes to training camp, if you're not able to go to Pittsburgh and see it with your own eyes, which there's only a handful of 100 people that could do that each day. I say a real challenge is being able to decipher like what matters and what doesn't matter, because this, whether it's Buffalo or 31 other teams, every single year there are training camp darlings or Cinderellas that look really, really good early on, and then they don't amount to much. Conversely, you and I have talked about this, and you know damn well how I feel about it. Terrell Bernard a year or so ago was in a battle for a starting job, and I was at like 7 training camp practices last year. I saw 0 that showed me, with my own eyes, at least my naked eyes, that, hey, this is going to be a really good player. Then he gets hurt. He didn't play the preseason, still starts week 1, and good God, man, this defense is not the same without Terrell Bernard. So some stuff that, I thought I saw last year, just, it didn't matter. So it can be tough, man, figuring out what matters, like who's reporting what and how much does it matter. That could be a tricky part of following your favorite team during training camp.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of players that kind of come out of nowhere and are those camp darlings, just look at last year. It was Andy Isabella, and he ended up not really developing into much. He played on the practice squad pretty much the entire year last year. So while it's easy to get excited about those, especially my co-host, he does it all the time, the 7th, 8th, 9th wide receiver on the depth chart, slowly making moves out there. You got to kind of temper expectations. And instead of just seeing how good he is, it's better to find a way that he could even possibly make the roster to even be worthy of talking to, because there's a few names out there that could be making giant plays in camp, but they could be doing it against third string defenders out there. So you also got to take into account, okay, he made this unbelievable catch, but who was defending him in that process, and who was the one throwing him the ball?
Yeah, that's a great point as well. Yeah, it gets to be this time too, and there's certain, men and women in the media that I really kind of cling to a little bit more than others. Like I try to follow as many people as I can. I'll listen to their shows or read, their observations or columns. But Joe B from The Athletic, he's right near the top. He's back. He's had an extended time off to spend with his family after having a baby. Good for him for that. But anyway, he's back. That observation column on The Athletic, that is something that I read all the time. I read Matt Marino's got observations on Syracuse.com. That's something I go to when he's actually in town. Joe Marino from Locked On Bills, which, by the way, shameless little plug here. I got to throw this in. Joe Marino is going to not only be in town and at camp all next week for the Buffalo Bills, but he's actually going to be on the show live next Wednesday night. We're going to be live from Sunny Reds in Lackawanna, and for a second straight year during Bills camp, Joe Marino is going to be joining me. So that will be a fun conversation. But anyway, his observations when he's there and able to see stuff with his own eyes is second to none. We kind of got a text group, PK. There's like 5 or 6 of us because we all can't get to practices, especially if we're not doing this full time for a living. But almost always at least one, if not 2 people are there, and they're kind of providing their own little text group, updates and some videos and stuff like that to really kind of give us a good grasp of what's going on. But let's talk about a couple things that we saw or heard about, at least anyway, Wednesday. To me, let's start here because this is the most important thing. It's got nothing to do with anything he did on the field, but Matt Milano. We have not seen any of Matt Milano at OTAs, Bills minicamp, except, little side work, stuff like that. But Matt Milano, a full participant in today's first training camp practice. Sean McDermott said that, they might ease him in a little bit here and there. He might get a little maintenance time, kind of, manage his workload during camp. But you want to talk about something right off the bat that is hugely, actually, that matters and is important for the Buffalo Bills. The fact that Matt Milano is out there healthy and alongside an emerging Terrell Bernard. I mean, you want to talk about something that really should get you feeling optimistic about this team. Look no further than that. That's big.
Yeah, I mean, even on top of him just being out there and being a full participant, which is amazing, and getting him out there day one, I thought they would work him in, and being a full participant off the bat is a really good sign. But on top of that, we've already mentioned it, even the start and then throughout the offseason, losing all the veteran pieces that you did. He is one of the sole remaining ones out there. To just have him out there, not just on the sidelines helping people out, but actually on the field and coaching the players on the field, I think is going to be such a huge factor moving forward, because there was so much changeover on this defense. If he can be one of those remaining veteran pieces out there that can help coach some of these younger players, that can help get them in the right positions, it'll take a little bit of the responsibility off like the Taylor Rapps and the Damar Hamlins who are playing behind them, that have to kind of take over for those roles from Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, who were the quarterbacks of the defense the whole time. If you can have him be on the field and kind of be that secondary coach out there, that helps along with him being fully healthy.
Absolutely. And look, I know if you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, you happen to stumble upon this like, woe is me. Look, Matt Milano 12 months ago was an all-pro linebacker. We would be saying all-pro linebacker Matt Milano out there making plays at camp. I can't help it. Homer in me, maybe, I suppose. But go back to the playoffs last year, okay? Go back to that Chiefs game and think about this. They lose. And again, the Chiefs had some injuries. Lots of teams have injuries, major injuries. But when it comes to the Buffalo Bills, they tried to stop a Kansas City offense in the playoffs that turns up in the playoffs with A.J. Klein and Tyrell Dodson as their 2 linebackers. Now today at practice, you got Terrell Bernard and you got Matt Milano. You want to talk about a night and day difference? That is why I continue, and I will die on this hill. I think maybe 2 years ago, the injuries were terrible, but I'm not sure the Bills were the best team in the conference. I truly feel a year ago that even if just Terrell Bernard plays, they beat the Chiefs. But if Bernard and Matt Milano are both out there, I think this was a Super Bowl team last year. I truly feel that too. And I know I'm being a fan by saying that, but I actually honestly feel that. Unbiased too.
I mean, when you're tossing out those a guy who was a street free agent looking to retire, and wasn't he on going to be going on a vacation or something? AJ Klein was, and they
Yeah,
called
he
him
was
and said, "Hey,
literally.
yeah." I mean,
He's in the
that is who
Keys.
they relied upon to kind of try to stop one of the greatest tight ends that have ever played. I'm I don't know if I'll go as far as you did saying that they would win, but I think having either one of those two linebackers out there would have made a tremendous difference in stopping the Kansas City Chiefs. It might have changed their game plan towards the end of the game, where they would have possibly gone for the touchdown instead of the missed field goal that ended up happening.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, man. Good point. All right, so Matt Milano's back. That's the biggest thing to me. That means the most. I think another development that people are talking about that I'm not going to go as far to look too much into it based on, again, one day. Let's not overreact too much to day one of camp. But Damar Hamlin, a guy who I feel like many have, like if you see or read a lot of Bill's 53-man pre-camp roster projections, Damar Hamlin is probably the most notable veteran that is not making the roster on most people's projections. And that still very well may be the case. But to start camp, he was actually starting at free safety alongside Taylor Rapp at strong safety. Mike Edwards, newly signed Mike Edwards, worked with the twos. They kind of alluded to, Sean McDermott alluded to before practice actually started, Mike Edwards has been hurt for a lot of the offseason. Like he didn't really get to work in much at all with, OTAs, minicamp, and stuff like that. But still, I think it's at least noteworthy that Damar Hamlin was the starter. And let's also kind of, if you can, go back a little bit, because a couple years ago when Hyde and Poyer were both hurt, Damar Hamlin stepped in, and I thought Damar Hamlin played really, really well. The Bills struggled at the other safety position badly, but I thought Damar was pretty damn good. Slow down, I thought he hit a little bit of a wall, and then, of course, he got hurt. And, last year was just being alive, let alone playing football, was a major victory for him. But he's a pretty talented player. And to start off camp, if nothing else, because Cam Lewis is on this roster and it's Damar Hamlin getting the start, even on day one, even if it's just for one day, the fact that he's playing, to me, again, without trying to overreact too much, it feels to me like that puts him in the mix. Like he is legitimately in the mix right now to be a part of this 2024 football team.
Yeah, I was going to bring up when he was actually starting in place of the injuries back on the safety position. I thought he was a bit rough to start. Then I thought he settled in very nicely. And on our show, we were complimenting him nonstop. I thought he was playing some of the best football possibly out of the whole defense back there. And then everything went down. And then last year, he was still working his way back in, and they had different players in front of him in the pecking order. But I'm not reading too much into him getting the first team reps in this game. I would like to see how it progresses. I think a lot of it is due to Mike Edwards missing a lot of the mini camps. So I think down the line in the next few days, I think that switch is going to be made. But like you just said, he's in the mix for a backup role on this team. And with the different kickoff rules this year, he could be very important in that position on special teams, because they did lose Tyler Medikevich. They lost a few other special teamers in the past. Can he fill in that niche role there on top of being a reliable guy that can fill in on the back end if there are injuries that pop up? Because there was special team, the new kickoff role, there's so many other positions that are going to be opening up in camp that you might not have thought 2, 3, 4 years ago.
You know what? Yeah, sure. And if, like right now we're talking about him and it's not a big deal, but come next Wednesday and, you're 4 or 5 practices in, if Damar Hamlin's still getting the nod over Mike Edwards, then I think at a minimum, you have yourself a legitimate competition between those two for a starter. We've been assuming going into camp that it was going to be Taylor Rapp versus Cole Bishop as prime competition to start at strong safety, which indications, by the way, that I'm getting, and again, not jump too far ahead of ourselves, but Cole Bishop is a talented player who will become a good player on this team. But the indications that I'm getting is that he's got a ways to go. And it's very unlikely that he's going to start this season. So I think you could almost, to this point, I've said pencil but you're getting close to maybe being able to write it in pen that Taylor Rapp is going to be the guy who starts the season at strong safety. Anyway, one other thing, then I want to get to a break. Dalton Kincaid is a very popular player, the first round pick a year ago. Again, this is where you could kind of get to camp and a practice and like don't read too much into it because they were doing a lot of red zone work. Those were the messages I kept getting. So guys were scoring a lot of touchdowns because they weren't going up and down the field. They were doing red zone stuff. But by all indications, a huge day one for Bills tight end Dalton Kincaid, who very well may be going into this season the Bills' top. I guess we got to say pass catcher because it's a collection of tight ends. This guy being great would make who's wide receiver 1 or 2 matter a hell of a lot less. But on a day with just a lot of stuff, people out there excited to get out there. A very big day one for Bill's second year now tight end, Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah, and our show that came out on Wednesday, we talked about our top 3 most important Buffalo Bills coming into the season, excluding Josh Allen, because obviously he would be number 1 on everybody's list. I had Dalton Kincaid number 1. And I'm not saying that, hey, like I'm not falling into the trap that is out there with all the nice highlights that are out there, but he only had 2 touchdowns last year. And even with Dawson Knox missing a chunk of the season, if he can develop into a red zone threat and Josh Allen is looking towards him, he could have a very, very good, dangerous year this year. And when it comes time to looking for a person in the red zone, if they're developing this system this early and he's beating man coverage that early in the red zone, Josh Allen's eyes could start locking onto one receiver back there, and it could be Dalton Kincaid. So I'm not buying completely into it after one day, but everything I'm reading, everything I'm seeing, he had a pretty heck of a good first day in training camp there.
Most important player to the success of this team, excluding Josh Allen, huh?
That's what I'm going with.
Well, he's up there. You could put it this way. He's one of the guys, there's probably 7 or 8 guys that you could make a case for, and he's definitely one of them for sure. A little side note, tight end, a little sidebar here too. Dawson Knox, apparently, from what I'm understanding, looks off to a good start. Is that somebody that the Bills are sleeping on? And look, Dalton Kincaid can still be that guy. Hell, he can still be a 1,000-yard receiver as a tight end. That doesn't mean that Dawson Knox won't have a role on this team. They're going to mix things up. Anthony Prohaska from Cover One, who is a real big X's and O guys. Like he sees formations of personnel, groupies and stuff. And I ain't got no idea what the hell he's even talking about half the time. I got to tell him, explain this shit to me like I'm in 5th grade. You know what I mean? But he was pointing out a lot of stuff, a lot of motion, a lot of different personnel packages and stuff like that. And there was plenty. And again, albeit just one day in red zone work on top of that. But Dawson Knox seeming to get a lot of burn with the ones as well.
Yeah, I could see him having a niche role on here, but a very valuable role for this offense because of all the changeover. And he's one of the longest holdover pass catchers out on the field. So they're probably going to rely on him early on while everybody else is still trying to catch up to that playbook. Yeah,
for sure. Look, he might not have 50 catches like he did 2 years ago or 49 or 48 over the last 2 years before last season, but I definitely think there's a role for him. Maybe not in every single week role, but he's going to have, 5 catches for 68 yards and a touchdown, but he'll certainly have some games where he matters like that as well. All right, let's take a real quick break. Come back on the other side. I want to talk about Keon Coleman, a couple of receivers, and then a couple of defensive notes from day one of Bills camp. So be right back, folks. All right, I am back with PK from the Buffalo Sports Collective. You know what, dude? Some of these content creators out there, and I know you check out some of them as well, they're good for certain things. Like Bruce Nolan, cover some of the guys from Cover One, kind of feel like you get a little bit of an education. Joe Marino, same. He can be entertaining. Tim Graham, when he does his show, he's got really good stories. I always like to lock in on those. You know what I think my claim to fame is with this podcast at this point? It's being full of shit when I tell people like you before we start going, PK, I'll tell you what, man, it's going to be short. It's only going to be a 30, 35-minute podcast. It's definitely not going to even be anything close to an hour. No, definitely not. That's me, dude. I am full of shit. I got no sense of timing. because I've read them and run off the mouth so much that I'm like, oh, holy shit, man, we're already 25 minutes into the show. We didn't even get to half the shit that I'm ready to get to. So that's what I think I'm known for, being completely full of shit about saying that these are going to be short episodes.
But we do it all this. We don't even mention how long we think we're going to go because we know whatever we say, it's going to be longer.
It's tough because it's not like being on a TV show or something like that. Or if you're like on the air on the radio, you have to get to a break at specific times. End of the day, I'll take a break when I want to take a break, and I'll wrap up the show when I feel like there's not anything left to talk about. But we're pretty into the weeds there with some interesting things to talk about. Keon Coleman, of course, is a very interesting thing to talk about. Day one, he got a lot of work with the ones. Again, a lot of red zone stuff, made a couple really nice catches. One of them on video that you can see, it's tough to tell if it was actually he was in or not. They're kind of arguing, going both ways. But to me, the important thing is that I thought he would maybe start slowly, but it seems like he's getting a lot of work with the ones right away. I would have thought maybe more for MVS or even Matt Collins. By the way, Matt Collins actually was the third receiver. When they started out their first set of 11 on 11 and they had three receivers, it was Shakir, Samuel, and Matt Collins, with Coleman primarily working in at the X. But a good first day for Keon Coleman. And I think maybe an indication that, don't expect him to be Stephon Diggs as a rookie, but this certainly seems like a guy that's going to be in the mix to make some plays right off the bat.
Yeah, he's going to be one that I'm going to slow roll here because like we've been saying, a lot of it has been the red zone work. So I want to see what happens when they're in the open field and they start running plays there, because I'm almost wondering, hey, did they do this game day one? Did they start working on red zone day one to get everybody hyped up on this rookie? Because that's going to be the role that he has early on in the season, where it comes time to, hey, we're inside the 20. This is Keon Coleman time, where the playbook is not wide open, where he's not going to have to beat, double coverage and the safeties cover him over top. I think this might be where they start slow rolling him, kind of like the Gabe Davis role when he was a rookie. He was mostly going to be just starting down the field or red zone. So I'm almost wondering, as we go on through camp, I want to see if he's able to hold on to this first team role, or are you going to start seeing the MVSs? Are you going to start seeing Matt Collins? Are you going to start seeing Khalil Shakir push him for time when they're between the 20s? That would be my main idea of looking towards as camp progresses. Is he getting the run with the ones there, or is it going to be the twos and he's just going to get the red zone work?
I agree, and I'm not going to, based off of one practice, back off of my one of my bold Bills pre-training camp predictions, and that was that I think MVS is going to have more receiving yards than Keon Coleman as a rookie. And I feel like I have to reiterate this and say this every time so I don't get bashed for it. I still think Keon Coleman is going to be a perfectly fine NFL player, potentially a very good NFL player. I'm talking about for rookie season. I would not be surprised if MVS outproduces him. I'm going to be honest with you, though. Like, Keon Coleman, physically very impressive. He's making these tough catches. He can go up, get the ball. No matter what, I think he's going to have a role on this team. Maybe it's, I shouldn't, I don't want to get too high when I look at him. He's got no shirt on and he's in Texas getting in that work, and his agent is taking videos of him, hype kind of videos of him working out. So I probably shouldn't get too high on that, but I also should get too low on what I saw today. I saw a couple routes that I'm like, it doesn't really look all that fast. There was one route where he broke it off and went to the sideline. I'm like, any good corner is staying with him on that. I don't know, dude. Am I getting a little bit grumpy already on Keon Coleman after one training camp practice? I don't love the separation that I'm seeing. And maybe it's just because he's such a bigger body and I'm used to Stephon. It's like, zing, 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 zing. You know what I mean? Or Curtis Samuel, those type of players. He's not that type of player.
Yeah, I think he needs to work on that route running. Yeah. And I don't think again, I'm not a draft analyst. I'm not at any of that kind of stuff. I just get behind a mic and spew what's on top of my head. But I thought going into the draft coverage and going into the draft, he was not the best at that kind of stuff. He was just like one of those freak athletes that can pinpoint the ball high. And I think that could be a reason why they're just pushing him in the red zone here, because again, I'm not sure how much run he's going to get between the 20s this year. And if they're slow rolling him, like your bold prediction there, it doesn't mean that he's not going to develop into a good wide receiver. It just means that it might take him a longer ways to get there. And that could be a reason why teams were jumping ahead to get other wide receivers because they saw some flaws in his game. Again, doesn't mean he's not going to develop in anything. He has all the traits that he could develop into a really, really good wide receiver, but maybe some of those people out there that are thinking, okay, this is going to be Stefon Diggs' replacement. Maybe they got to pump the brakes a little bit and see, hey, this might take a bit longer for him to develop.
He's a Gabe Davis replacement more than anything else. I mean, there's no question about that. And look, we go back to draft season. I think part of the reason why I wasn't really ever in on him and didn't really think about him much in mock drafts, nor most Bills content creators, is simple. I mean, we heard over and over and over again that, the Bills are really looking for more explosive, speedy, get open quick off the line type players. He's not that type of player.
Right.
But, again, we'll see how he goes. It's a promising day one for Keon Coleman. Let's just leave it at that. 5 wide receivers, by the way, worked with Josh Allen throughout the practice with the ones. It was Samuel, Keon Coleman, Shakir, Matt Collins, and MBS. Those were the 5. All the other wide receivers, because this is going to be a position battle, who's going to make the bottom of the roster. But Chase Claypool and Shorter and Hamler, Isabella, Shavers, all those guys who played and did anything at practice, they were all catching passes from Mitch Trubisky. So I think that kind of sets the stage right off the bat, who the top 5 are probably going to be. I still maintain that it's Justin Shorter. I feel like he's got the inside track on that 6 spot. I think they're going to keep 6 receivers, not 7. Not to say Chase Claypool can't leap them, or KJ Hamler if he's strong on special teams. That's a nice little indication right off the bat. There are 5 different players we're working with Josh. So that kind of separates those 5, I think, from the others.
Yeah, I think it also indicates that there's not a true alpha on this team, which we knew going in, that the ball is going to be spread around a lot. So getting a lot of these wide receivers involved with a Josh Allen to kind of build up that repertoire is definitely going to help.
Sure. So that's the receivers. One position that's going to become interesting, not really so much yet, but it'll emerge, I think, is kick returner. It's going to mean more this season than it has in the past because of the new rules. And 5 guys got some work, not necessarily in any kind of order. So these aren't like in order of who took the first one, who took the second one, but Ray Davis, a rookie, Daquan Hardy, the rookie from Penn State, he's been a pretty good returner. I think that might be part why he got drafted, 6th-round corner. Ty Johnson, probably the most reliable and trustworthy, the veteran of that group. KJ Hamler and Andy Isabella. All got some work. A little too early, to kind of get any kind of projection of who might have a head start on that job. But you see that list, kind of feels like those are the guys who should be in the mix, right?
Yeah, and we've come such a long way from going to take a bathroom break during the kickoff, because now it's actually an important play. And they're actually going to have to take time to try to consider who is going to be that guy back there, rather than, who was it previous years where it was just guys back there to make sure, okay, it gets into the end zone. I think personally, Ty Johnson's probably has the lead up here, not just because he's a veteran, but out of all those names, yes, Ray Davis is probably going to be making the team, but he's a rookie. Can Hamler squeeze his way in there? Can Isabella? But that's why I think Ty Johnson, who doesn't have a lock on the roster, but I think it's as close to Penn writing it in that he's probably going to make the team. So that's why I think there's a big reason why he's going to be the lead dog back there. But it's open competition back there, and it's definitely going to be interesting to see in camp how they practice this. And what I read from Mike Tomlin was that was part of the reason why they wanted to do the joint practices with the Bills, is they want to practice this and get this full go. Yeah. Because they don't want to just go into week 1 not knowing what to expect. So this is definitely from where it wasn't prior years. This is definitely a competition to keep an eye on in camp.
I think Ty Johnson has a leg up right now to begin things, because he's going to be on your 45-man. He's obviously making the 53-man roster. He's also going to be on your 45-man active game roster. Ray Davis, you could say the same thing as well. If Hardy were to make this team, it's going to be primarily through special teams. And if he does, that's a roster spot that he's, again, not only making the 53, but he's obviously got to be playing on game day to be returning kicks. So that's, a defensive back that otherwise would make the roster. That's not ditto for for Hamlin or Isabella, if one of them were to emerge, that means they're the sixth receiver, which means they definitely got to play special teams.
Yep.
Besides just playing on kickoffs, like they're going to have to be able to cover kicks or punts and stuff as well. It could happen. It could happen. I just right now, for those reasons, I kind of give a significant edge to Ty Johnson. But who knows? Maybe Ray Davis could be good at it. I mean, hopefully we'll start to see some in camp. But anyway, those are your kick return candidates. The biggest probably news besides Milano being healthy and not being injured is that, well, it's only one practice. But as of now, I mean, who knows? You never know what happens when you wake up Thursday. Someone gets dinged up you don't know about the day of. But doesn't seem like there were any significant injuries or even injuries of note at day one of camp, which is always a big victory. Chase Claypool got dinged up his leg a little bit, but he was jogging around catching balls with Khalil Shakir and stuff after practice. So obviously nothing serious. Kind of feel like that though, BK, at the end of the day, these are veterans. These are, NFL guys. And the biggest thing you're holding your breath for is no one gets hurt. Like the Minnesota Vikings, I can't remember the guy's last name, but I just read about it before we went on the air tonight. Their corner who's competing to be a starter, he's out for the year, tore his ACL, first day of practice. That's the shit you need to avoid. So no significant injuries for the Bills on day one. That's probably always the biggest thing.
Yeah, 100% knock on wood. No injuries. But yeah, I saw that same news. I think he played in 5 games, started 3 last year, and was in competition to start it. And that's definitely it's similar to like preseason games for hockey or football. Just don't get injured. That's the biggest thing is whatever happens, if you have a good day or a bad day of practice, as long as you're healthy at the end of the day, it's a victory.
Sure. I want to get into I just wanted to drop a couple fun facts for you. I was reading a lot of these. Got to give credit to where it's due here. Tim Graham from The Athletic had a kind of a camp primer. And when I read it, I was like, there were a couple things that kind of popped at me and kind of wanted to share these with you and with the audience and get your take on these. Not this first one, though. Tim didn't have shit to do with this one. I saw this on Twitter, and I couldn't believe the stat when I saw it. But it's true. I never realized this. The Buffalo Bills, folks, if you're talking about, you follow your team and you regardless of what your record is, you probably have a couple stinkers where you just don't show up that week and you get blown out. Well, during the regular season, at least anyway, nobody has blown out the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills, as we get ready to start this season, are tied for the most consecutive games in NFL history with the Packers. 40 straight games, the Bills' losses have been by 6 points or less. So you're talking about a team that gives themselves, even if they're playing like shit, at least an opportunity to be in it at the end of the game. Look no further than the Buffalo Bills. 40 straight games, they have not lost by 7 or more points.
See, I'm looking at it the way of my health. There's a reason why I have high blood pressure, and it's because the Bills play close games nonstop. Even if they don't pull them out, they're not getting blown out. But that means the games are close. There's a reason why all of Buffalo might have a bit of a drinking problem, because the Bills do this. 40 straight games is unbelievable. Like, I didn't know that stat going in, but you saying it and then me thinking back of all the times I got behind this microphone and recorded after a game, and you're just going, oh, what the hell did I just watch? It makes sense. It's just it's a ridiculous stat that, and credit to Sean McDermott, he gets his team to perform and get up 4 games. It's easy to go into some weeks and just go, hey, we don't have it. Let's turn in for the night and get ready for the next week. It's an unbelievable stat that you just pulled out there.
Yeah, it is, man. And you'd have to go all the way back a couple of years ago. The Indianapolis Colts just beat the shit out of the Bills that game. I remember that. They could not
I don't know why that one's on the top of my head either.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, that's regular season. It does need to be said that, unfortunately, they did have during that span a kind of a lopsided loss, and that was in the playoffs in 2022. Cincinnati came here and put it on the Bills at their own at Highmark Stadium and embarrassed them. But regular season anyway, when you pull up on a Sunday, Monday, Thursday, whatever it may be, you know that your team's not going to get blown out. I just thought that was pretty wild. Another thing and this is from Tim Graham's article that I read. This is a much younger team than I thought. Tim pointed out that there's only 6 players on this roster right now that are going to be older than 30 this year. Matt Collins, Leal Collins, Von Miller, DeQuan Jones, Deshaun Williams, and Sam Martin. And when you look at that 6, Sam Martin and Leal Collins are hardly locks to make this team. Deshaun Williams is far from a lock to make this team as well. The Bills would have to keep 5 defensive tackles probably for him to make that opening 53-man roster. They're a pretty damn young team, and there's not a lot of 30-year-old plus on the team. And again, I guess that's what happens when you get rid of guys like Mitch Morse. That's the upside of getting rid of guys like Morse and Poyer and Hyde, etc. So this is a much younger team than I originally thought.
Yeah, I mean, for 91 players, only having 6 over 30, that's pretty stinking good. But like we've been saying all offseason multiple times on this show, it's a new wave, and this is a new opportunity for a lot of these players to come up and be that next core piece of the Buffalo Bills and make a name for themselves like the old regime did. And, throwing out that stat, only 6 players over 30, a lot of these players could be around for a long, long time.
Yeah, for sure. And then one other thing, too, in terms of longest tenured Bills, there's 3. Deion Dawkins, Matt Milano, Reed Ferguson. They are the longest tenured Bills, and they're all going into their 8th season. Kind of feels to me, this is how time is just flying. Matt Milano almost feels to me like a young player still. So does Deion Dawkins. I'm like, these guys are still a little bit on the come up, Well, they're not. These guys have been around for a long time, man. They're going into their 8th season. But yeah, these are the longest tenured veterans on the team. Dawkins, Milano, Reed Ferguson.
It's pretty impressive for when you're looking at, 2 of the 3. Matt Milano was a 5th-round pick. Reed Ferguson he's been cut multiple times. And I know it was hey, we're going to sign you right back. We just need to cut you to make these transitions. But for being a long snapper, who's a pretty stinking good one and, fan favorite, being around to stick around to a team like this long, it's very impressive to see 2 players come for where they came from and stick around with the same team for as long as they have.
Is there anybody, before we wrap up, actually, I want to get to Sabres topic before we wrap up, to put a wrap on the Bills for day 1 at camp. Anything or anyone that maybe we didn't hit on at all that in the coming days you're at least interested in reading about or listening to about or watching videos about? I mean, we really didn't see anything about the running game as of yet. Maybe some cornerback stuff, things like that. There's just no defensive line stuff, which is early in camp. You're not going to get much of that. But anything that you're kind of looking forward to watching develop that we really haven't talked about?
I mean, I didn't see a ton of news and highlights on Curtis Samuel. It'll be interesting to see how he gets worked in and where their mindset is on him getting involved there. James Cook, if he really did work on his pass catching out of the backfield there, because a lot of times where there's a lot of vacated targets, a lot of those get picked up by the running game. And it'll be interesting to see if he's worked on that, because he had a lot of bad drops last year. If he can build that into his repertoire and be more of a threat in that aspect as well, that's another added weapon to this unknown offense so far that Joe Brady can pull out of his back pocket.
Yeah. For me, Kyrie Elam, I need to know how he's doing, because that cornerback position is really important. You need someone you could trust behind the starters, kind of like a Dane Jackson type. Only thing I saw from Kyrie Elam on day 1, and I apologize because off the top of my head, I don't know who the receiver was that he was guarding, but he got called for a defensive holding penalty.
I think it was Chase Claypool. I think it was the one.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? You're right. So it's like, well, Kyrie Elam's there. Training camp started because Kyrie Elam is getting penalties and getting talked to on the sideline by Sean McDermott. Better step up. You better have a good camp, because if he doesn't, I feel like Brandon Beane is going to go outside this organization and get a corner. That'll certainly be something that we follow. Before we get out of here, I didn't plan on talking any Sabres, but late afternoon on Wednesday, some pretty significant news, I think. UPL avoids arbitration, and the team comes to a 5-year agreement with him. $4.75 million average annual salary now. I looked it up. 21st among goalies. So it's not as high. I first heard that number, PK. I'm like, whoa, it's pretty damn high. And it's a pretty big term commitment. But then I'm like 21st. I'm like, all right, well, that's not high. You can be able to tune goalie and say that that's not even overpaid. But what were your thoughts on that? 5 years, $4.75 million. Do you agree with it or not? Of course, Devin Levi is still in the mix. Of course.
It smells a lot like a couple off seasons ago where they're starting to pay players once again, where it was Tage Thompson, it was Dylan Cousins, you're paying them for trying to get them on the cheaper of what you're expecting them to develop into. And I know UPL played unbelievable last year, and Phil's been still on my case wondering, hey, when are you going to actually believe that this is the UPL? And I went, if he's still doing this in January of this coming year, I'll believe that he's finally figured it out and put it all together. They're paying him for the hope that he will be a discount when year 2 and 3 and 4 kicks off with this one. But on top of that, it's also pushing Devin Levi that, hey, this guy's performing great. Like, we're not just going to crown you the king of the crease here. You're not just going to be the next Ryan Miller, next Hasek, and so on and so forth, just because we've had great goaltenders in the past. It's not just going to be your job to hand it to you. 5 years, I was not expecting 5 years whatsoever. And I think it gives UPL a lot of security moving forward, but it also gives the team that, hey, if Devin Levi really does develop into that star player, they can use both those tandems until it's time to pay Devin Levi that massive contract. And if UPL is playing great, do what Boston did. You can go out and trade like they did with Allmark. That contract's not tough to move if he's playing great. $4.75 million for a goaltender when the cap's going up. When it's time for him to get another deal, whether it's the Sabres or somebody else, he's going to be down in the 30, 35 range of being paid for a goaltender. It's a good deal if he continues to play like he did last year. If he doesn't, and they're struggling to find a goaltender, they might be coming back to bite this and be wondering, hey, why did we pay this guy?
Yeah, look, I avoided the typical Patrick Moran knee-jerk reaction where I just instantly react without even thinking, usually negatively, especially if it's the Buffalo Sabres. I like this contract. Of course, prefaced on the fact that UPL doesn't become somebody who's always getting hurt or somebody who just stinks, and last year was an anomaly. Because you can look at it this way. That contract kind of brings the whole spectrum of scenarios into play. If UPL, let's just say he found himself last year, and this is who he is, what he was last year at the back end of the season, you just got yourself a really solid goalie at a very reasonable, if not cheap, salary. That's the best case scenario. If $4.75 million, and that's a guy who's going to ultimately give you as much as 40 games, maybe even as little as 25 games, that's not an outrageous salary. And to your point, if Devin Levi just bursts onto the scene this year or the year after and just becomes that guy, you're like, that's the guy. That's our guy. He's got to get in that. He's got to be behind the pipes as much as possible. You're right. That contract at UPL is a very tradable contract. The only downside, again, is but you got to roll the dice, man. You're the GM, you got to roll the dice. There are no sure things. You're rolling the dice that what you saw last year is pretty much going forward what UPL is going to be. So now everyone's signed except for Krebs, which after they sign him, whether it's arbitration or they work something out, I can't imagine any long-term deal with him. But they're going to be around $7 million-ish, maybe a little even bit more than that in cap space. So options are on the table still.
Yeah, it's going to what I was afraid of and what I was saying about the Buffalo Sabres. If they're truly getting rid of Jeff Skinner, use the money, and they haven't yet. And that's what I'm afraid of, is if they're just going to stick it in their back pocket. And I get that he was taking up a roster spot, and I completely understand why they did it. But if you were just going to pocket the money, why didn't you just wait another year and eat some? It would cost you less in the long run, and it would cost less on the salary cap. It was easier to cut him next year than it was this year if you're not going to do anything with that $7 million. And I get it's still July 25th. I get it. There's still time to go and get a top 6 forward. But if you do not do anything with the money that you got from buying out Jeff Skinner, I'm going to go insane.
I'll end by saying this. The one thing, and I can't believe I'm doing it. I'm putting on a Sabres homer hat here for a quick second, but I feel like maybe right now, any attempt that they've tried to get a top 6 forward has probably been rebuffed by the player that they're trying to get, saying either I got a no trade, I ain't coming here, or you could trade for me, but I promise you I'm not signing a long-term extension. It's not going to happen. So that might be the issue right now. But you go into the season and you got this cap room, and let's say Lindy Ruff is doing a good job, and these players are healthier, and they're in Tage, and some of these guys are producing like they did 2 years ago. Now you're getting January, February, a team that's in contention, in the mix, and you have a couple good players, laboring around on shitty teams that wouldn't come here in July. That player might want to come to Buffalo in January or February, and now bam, you got the cap room to get that player who might want to come later in the season. Because I think that's a bigger issue. I tend to, trust me, nobody loves putting Terry Bagula and the Buffalo Sabres on blast more than me. But I think the bigger issue is nobody wants to come here. So if they win during the season and you got $7 million in cap, in your back pocket to swing a trade for a big time forward or something like that, maybe that's how it plays out.
Yeah, I want them to make the playoffs and be good so much. I'm bought in. I will believe the reason behind it because it makes sense and completely makes sense. Whether the Sabres actually think that way is a different story, but the way you phrase it, that makes perfect sense that, hey, come January, February, if we're in the mix, we got $7 million. We can go out and get a more expensive, even possible rental player to add to this mix and push us over the top. So I will fully go with your theory that they're doing it this way, while on the back burner knowing the Sabres are not smart enough to be thinking that way. There's no way they're thinking that way.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this episode than us both being on the same page when it comes to something Buffalo Sabres related. Folks, if you haven't done so already, make sure you follow PK on Twitter at PK_BSC. By the way, is it Twitter? Is it X now? I still say Twitter all the time. I feel like I'm a dying breed now. Like I feel like less and less people are saying Twitter, and now it's pretty much X. Like, do I got to say follow PK on the X? Is it the X? Is it just X?
In our intro and outro, I say X, but when talking to people, I say Twitter because I'm not going to be the person that just say, hey, you follow me on X, because it sounds stupid.
Well, follow them on that bullshit app that everybody still lingers on and spends way too much of their life messing around and scrolling on. At PK_BSC. Do check out Buffalo Sports Collective, PK and Phil. And again, congratulations to them on getting married next week. They do a great, great job with their show. Thanks very much, man. I appreciate having you on. And a quick little story for the people out there, too. We were supposed to record this hours ago. I had a bad back issue, man. I had to go to media care, get a little bit of attention. So we're doing this hours later. So you stuck around, I should say, and still recorded this with me much later than we were supposed to. So I really do truly appreciate you, man.
My wife thanks you because she just kicked me down the hall and got an hour by herself. So I'm pretty sure she's happy about it too.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching and for listening. I'll be back. Brand new show. More Bills talk, I'm sure, as well tomorrow.